What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and today we're going to be talking about some of the new leaks that are coming out about the recently announced 9th edition Tyranid Codex. As you may know, I like Tyranids. That's what I play most of the time, so anytime we get even a little inkling about this codex, I'm going to be talking about it. That little inkling that we're talking about today is leaked datasheet summaries that are from some of the revised instruction manuals that come in the Tyranid monster kits. Now, before we get into it, huge grain of salt with this. These are often falsified. The ones that we have to talk about today, to my super duper amateur eye, don't have any obvious signs of being photoshopped, so I don't know if they are doctored or not, but I'm sure we'll find out in the not too distant future. But the stats on them are frankly ridiculous, so I wouldn't put it past the trolls of the internet to make up some weird stats just to get Tyranid players' hopes up. Anyway, let's talk about them and the spoiled stats we have for this new Tyranid Codex, starting with the hungry hippo himself, the Haruspex. This poor little Haruspex has been much maligned throughout 9th edition, and for good reason. He only does things in melee and only moves 7 inches, and it hits on 4s. Like, who designed a frickin' melee war beast with a weapon skill 4? What a dummy. This one got a 3+ weapon skill. That's pretty good. According to the stat block here, he's also moving up to speed 8. And most importantly, both the Haruspex and we'll talk about the Exocrine stat line later have gotten an enormous change in their defensive profile. 15 wounds, retaining that high toughness of 8, and moving to a 2+ save. That's pretty good, and even though it's probably going to be tough to get this guy across the table with that low speed and what I imagine is a reining in of Tyranid's mobility options in their new codex, 15 wounds with a 2+ armor save certainly helps you get up the table pretty consistently. We also see some weapon profiles. These aren't too different from what we have already. The big claws going up to D3 plus 3 damage instead of just D6, whereas the mouth attacks remaining the same. I assume that we have a similar mechanic to what the Haruspex does currently, where it makes multiple attacks with its maw attack, and then for each model that it kills with its maw attack, it gets to make a claw attack. So you can either be chaining a bunch of attacks into claw attacks to kill an infantry unit and something else, or just do additional damage to infantry. I'm sure something like that will be here. Obviously, these datasheets don't have special abilities on them. They're just a stat card reference sheet, essentially. So we don't know any special abilities that are going to be associated with this model or any of its weapons. And that's it. The weapons haven't changed too much, although the defensive profile is pretty mint. What else has changed a lot, though, is the big brother of the Haruspex, the Exocrine. And this datasheet is probably the most unbelievable one out of the pack that we're going to talk about today. The defensive profile of the chassis, as well as its movement speed, is essentially identical to the Haruspex. Staying at speed 8, this is a big increase from move 6 that the Exocrine is currently. It goes to a base ballistic skill 3 that then degrades to 4 and 5. So unlike the current version that starts at 4, only degrades up to 5, but gives itself +1 to hit, I imagine the +1 to hit effect is going away, which is a benefit for the Exocrine if effects like Bioweapon Bond stay in the faction. You can buff it down to a 2+ ballistic skill. That's frickin' sick. It also got a 3+ weapon skill, although otherwise its melee profile is totally unchanged. If the Exocrine is in melee, though, it wants to be shooting you with its absolutely ridiculous gun, so you're not as worried about the melee profile. It does also have those 15 wounds and 2+ save, just like the Haruspex has, and probably more important for the Exocrine, because the Exocrine wants to be standing out in the open and trading shots with an opposing big shooter thing. It's basically a battleship of a monster, so it just wants to gut into these enormous range slug matches with people, and that defensive profile is going to be perfect at it. Now let's talk about that offensive profile that is going to be trading hits with. The upgrade to the bioplasma cannon is absolutely insane. Stays at 36-inch range, seems fine. D3 plus 6 attacks, rather than just the flat 6 that it has currently. Now, I have a sneaking suspicion that we do see its weird double shoot mechanic when it remains stationary, or when it doesn't move, specifically not remain stationary, which is a whole discussion we have on stream almost every time. That is probably going to go away or be replaced by a different effect. But even shooting this thing one time, you're getting between 7 and 9 attacks, hitting on 2s or 3s, strength 8, AP 4, flat 3 damage. What? That's crazy. This thing just fires a Vanguard veteran squad full of Thunderhammers at its opponent every turn from a 36-inch range. That is a phenomenal point profile, and depending on the points cost of the Exocrine, this could catapult Exocrines from their, relative unplayability that they're in right now. They've fallen off a little bit because of changing mechanics, but this could throw them right back into the forefront of competitive Tyranid lists, and that's good because I have 2 ones that are painted gorgeously and I'm very proud of. So I would love to see these Exocrines get a big glow up and be shooting people to death from across the table. Now, while they're shooting people to death from across the table, we do need some stuff to give them synapse and, maybe also punch your opponent to death with weird bony sticks. And for that, we have the Hive Tyrant. Now, it seems like, according to these leaks, winged Hive Tyrants and foot Hive Tyrants are going to be either separate data sheets or have built-in stat differences. Whether or not that means that you can take 6 Hive Tyrants in a list, I don't know. If you can, I'm going to do it because I own too many Hive Tyrants. I have a problem. But I know a lot of people, myself included, have been theorizing that they might get a Demon Prince style ability where Hive Tyrants or a Crisis Commander Captain style ability where Hive Tyrants get restricted to 1 per detachment, meaning you would have to take multiple detachments in order to take a bunch of Hive Tyrants. That would suck. I would be very sad. All of the Hive Tyrants that I own would sit on my shelf and looking absolutely gorgeous and handsome. The Swarmlord is the first one, and this dude looks absolutely insane. He probably is going to lose or have a reduction to his double move ability. I think as a Tyranid player, you should be prepared for that. Just mentally prepare yourself to not move your important models twice every turn, because frankly, that ability is really super powerful. But fortunately, Swarmlord gets a huge glow up in terms of his offensive and defensive profile. We see some of the stats remain the same. The top bracket, move 9, 2+ weapon skill, 2+ ballistic skill, although that probably doesn't matter. Strength 8. He also is going up, according to this, to toughness 8, which is a pretty big deal. He is getting an additional wound as well, going up to 13 wounds and moving from 6 to 9 melee attacks. That's right, big old 9. He's sticking at a 2+ armor save as well, so small arms fire is probably going to bounce off of him, although it does beg the question whether or not he's going to retain his extra invulnerable save ability in melee. I have to wonder whether that turns into a -1 to hit, and he just retains his 4+ invulnerable save as he has in the past. Now, also, his Bone Sabers have seen a little bit of a change. +1 strength, meaning that they are going to just lock in at strength 9. Whoa, amazing. Tyranids have had an absolute hell of a time getting things above strength 7 or strength 8 in melee, and Swarmlord is just doing it here with, as I'll remind you real quick, 9 frickin' melee attacks. What is that? AP 4 for flat 3 damage, so we're getting additional strength and additional AP off of those additional 3 attacks that Swarmlord's making. Now, the trade-off here is that he does bracket a little bit differently. He still loses his movement, going from 9 down to 8 down to 6. A little bit of an odd bracket now that I look at it. His current version loses 2 inches of movement on each of its levels, going from 9 to 7 to 5. He loses 1 inch on his first bracket and then 2 inches on his second. I guess it's not that big of a deal. It might just be a little bit tougher to remember. He also brackets on his weapon skill and ballistics, something that he does not do currently. However, the current Swarmlord bracketing profile loses both strength and attacks when he goes down brackets. And because he's going to be sitting at strength 8 up to 9 with the Bone Sabers and 9 attacks the entire time, the relative reduction in damage output isn't going to be that great, since while you are hitting a lesser proportion of your attacks than you would be if compared to the current bracketing profile for the Swarmlord, your attacks are just going to be generically better, and you also have more of them, so, what are you complaining about? This is just a huge upgrade to Swarmlord. If all Swarmlord has is just this phenomenally powerful melee profile, that's probably good enough for him to see play, as long as he has something to benefit that movement of 9, which I have to imagine that he will. Now, I mentioned before, we are seeing some different profiles for the winged and foot Hive Tyrants, and let's talk about those. Starting with the winged Hive Tyrant, we can see its movement value is remaining exactly the same, 16 on the top bracket down to 12, down to 8 as it loses those wounds. That's totally fine. I think move 16 on that guy is still freaking amazing. He brackets the same way as his weapon skill, but his ballistic skill is a lot different. He starts at ballistic skill 2 and now brackets down to 3 and then down to 4 on his bottom bracket. The current version of the Hive Tyrant starts at ballistic skill 3 and does not bracket past 4, so it only ever gets -1 to hit with its bracket. In this case, it's just starting from a higher threshold, which is pretty sweet. The bio cannons you put on Hive Tyrants are very expensive, so it is obnoxious when that dude equips a big heavy venom cannon or something and then just misses a bunch because he's not very good at shooting. Ballistic skill 2 will certainly help with that. He's also bumping up a strength value, going from strength 6 to strength 7. That's a really big breaking point, especially if you have any strength increasing effects in the Codex, things like Murderous Size that you can already put on Hive Tyrants. If those get retained, and you can get Hive Tyrants up to that threshold of strength 8, where they wound toughness 4 on 2s, and toughness 7 on 3s, and toughness 8 on 4s, that's going to be phenomenal. It also bumped up an attack, going to 5 base attacks, which I imagine will also be supplemented once you start adding additional weapons to it. Otherwise, it remains mostly the same with a 3+ save, and what I have to imagine is going to be a 4+ invulnerable save. I mean, right?
Now, I'm going to talk about the weapons in more detail when we move to the Foot Hive Tyrant version, because the Foot Hive Tyrant datasheet reference has uncut off versions of these weapon profiles. There's some interesting things to talk about there, but the one thing I do want to point out is that it seems to me like there's a potential that the Winged Hive Tyrant being separate from the Foot Hive Tyrant means that it may only have a single weapon slot for its weapons. One of the weird things about the Winged Hive Tyrant is that it only has one weapon hardpoint, and the other one is taken up by those wings. So when you're assembling the model, it can actually only equip one weapon. Now, that said, we can see that there is a profile for the feet here. So it might be that the Winged Hive Tyrant always has a foot attack, or potentially, based on the profile that we can see for the feet and the Scything Talons, the feet might just count as an additional set of Scything Talons. Then, on top of that, you could equip either a ranged weapon or an additional melee weapon, depending on how you want to load out your Flying Hive Tyrant. I don't know, it's literally an infinite universe of possibilities if this becomes a separate datasheet from the Foot Hive Tyrant. The other thing I want to point out is that no profile is listed for the tail attack, so we may be losing our prehensile pincer tail extra attack thingy. I don't think any great loss maybe would be had there. That mostly ends up wasting time because people just save it because it's AP0. If that attack just gets rolled into their base profile and they can make it with their bone swords or whatever, that's totally acceptable to me.
Let's talk about the last profile that we have from these spoilers. This is the Foot Hive Tyrant. Like we saw with the Winged Hive Tyrant, this looks like an entirely different datasheet or a different stat block from the standard, from the Winged Hive Tyrant, and comes with a couple very important changes. First off, obviously, we have 2 sets of weapons highlighted, both a ranged weapon and a melee weapon. I almost wonder if we might see Foot Hive Tyrants be loaded out to have 1 gun and 1 set of melee weapons, and that be the locked-in build for them. I don't know if we're going to continue to see the level of flexibility that Tyranids have had in the past, where you can equip any set of weapons to those hardpoints. A big reason for which being the fact that these kits don't actually include a lot of those options. So players are forced to scrounge elsewhere on the internet for them, which can create some issues. Now, the big difference between this guy and the Winged Hive Tyrant, although he is a little bit slower, obviously only move 9 rather than that move 16, ostensibly with fly, and he has the same movement bracketing that we saw from the Swarmlord. In fact, he brackets identically to the Swarmlord, losing a point of weapon skill and ballistic skill, as well as 1 or 2 inches of movement for each bracket that it goes down. Now, the difference here is that the Foot Hive Tyrant, according to this, is moved to toughness 8 and has a 2+ save, making it a very similar defensive profile to the Exocrine, which is a very interesting comparison, given that it looks like these guys are going to be much more powerful ranged aggressors. As opposed to the Winged Hive Tyrant datasheet, we can see the weapon profiles pretty clearly for the Foot Hive Tyrant version, and assuming that these are identical, these have some super interesting implications. First off, the Heavy Venom Cannon is moving from D3 to flat 3 attacks. It is staying in Strength 9 and moving to AP 3, so an additional point of AP there, and damage 4. 3 4-damage gunshots at 36 inches is nothing to shake a stick at for this guy, especially since alongside the Exocrine, he can fulfill that sort of battleship role, where at toughness 8 and a 2+ armor save, he's much less afraid of going out in the open and trading shots with enemy heavy hitters. The Stranglethorn Cannon has also a big glow up, moving from D6 to D3+3, probably still with that blast keyword, I would have to imagine. It's moving up a strength and AP value as well, moving up to strength 8 AP 2, but staying at 2 damage. 3 damage, I think, would be a lot to expect from a Stranglethorn Cannon, but at 2 damage, with the amount of damage reduction that we see going around the game right now, I'm not even sure that this gun is going to be particularly good. Moving on, we have some really interesting numbers on the melee weapon profiles. First off, the double Bone Sword loadout is not even included here at all, which leads me to believe that it's either being phased out, or maybe GW just assumes that you'll reference the single bone sword profile on this datasheet reference card rather than including a separate picture for the double bone sword. I don't know. That bone sword profile, however, is enormously more powerful than it was, being +3 strength, so bringing it up to strength 10 with that additional strength that the Hive Tyrant datasheet is apparently getting, and moving from the lows of AP2 up to an astounding AP4. It is staying at 3 damage, however, so that's fine, I guess. Where things get weird are the monstrous scything talons. These guys looks like mostly are staying the same from the current version. They're strength user and AP3, but only 2 damage. This leads me to believe that it's maybe just the generic version of the weapon and is a free upgrade for the Hive Tyrant, so maybe you can save some points by keeping that weapon. I have no idea. 2 damage on those things is kind of mind-boggling to me. And if there was one stat in this entire set of leaks, besides maybe the Exocrine gun, that would lead me to disbelieve them, it would be the fact that these huge and also very common melee weapons in the Tyranid Codex would be reduced down to 2 damage. Now, that said, they could have some special rules to make up for that, you know, potentially making a billion more attack. Maybe the trade-off is either the strength 10 AP4 3 damage swings from the monstrous bone swords, or doubling your attacks for scything talent, making 10 strength 7 AP3 2 damage attacks. Obviously, 2 damage significantly worse into damage reduction, which makes the comparison between those 2 weapons a pretty important one. I have no way of knowing this, however, and we'll just have to find out. I also wonder if it might be that this profile is the same as the feet on the Foot Hive Tyrant. Maybe we see those also at strength user AP3 for 2 damage. And potentially, those feet might even just be another set of scything talons. Anyway, I ended up talking about these leaks way more than I thought I would, so this video got way too long, and I'm gonna have to edit it down quite a bit, which I'm not super looking forward to, but you know what? It's okay. Talking about Tyranids is never a waste of time. Let me know down in the comment section what you think about these leaks, and whether or not you think that they are correct. I don't see any obvious editing errors in them, so they look like a pretty legit photograph, but obviously, they are pretty wild, so I would not be surprised if they ended up being a facsimile. Anyway, that's all I have to say about this particular leak. Thanks for joining me while we talk about some Tyranid spoilers. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.